It's the 7th film by Quentin Tarantino, a sprawling epic set in the Deep South during the time of American slavery that, yes, stirred up its share of controversy over its language, violence, and, yep, action figures of slaves. Despite all this and more, Django Unchained became QT's biggest success at the time. So how did that happen? Well, if you're curious about what makes us so curious, let's find out. What the f happened to this movie? Quentin Tarantino had been interested in making a movie centering around slavery as far back as 2007. Not of the direct variety, but more of a genre film and piece of revisionist history. As we all know, Tarantino loves tinkering with history. Hey, somebody had to shoot Hitler in the face. And just so we can get it out of the way, no, Kanye West did not come up with the idea. So Kanye, sorry QT shot Hitler in the face. Early on, it was almost a collaboration with RZA, who did music for Kill Bill, and who's the man with the iron fist would provide a crossover partner. This, of course, did not pan out. The key inspiration came from Sergio Corbucci's fantastically explosive Django, starring Franco Nero. Nero is given a terrific cameo.
The D is silent.
I know.
QT had been writing an essay about Corbucci as part of a book about directors, hinting at his now part-time career as an author, ingesting subtext that Corbucci himself may not have meant to employ, like fascism in the Wild West. He too was spinning soundtracks to spaghetti westerns, which is fitting since Django Unchained would be a spin itself on the spaghetti western. The title was a play on the 1959 fantasy film Hercules Unchained. And don't worry, Tarantino is the first to admit when and where he borrows. He even called it a rip-off sequel like so many other Django wannabes, which had become a bit of a subgenre itself. When the script was complete, he could begin the casting process. Tarantino described Django as a mythical character and, quote, uber-masculine black male figure of folklore, and so the casting would have to be just right. One consideration was The Wire's Michael K. Williams, who couldn't sign on due to filming Boardwalk Empire. Idris Elba, also of The Wire, Chris Tucker, and Terrence Howard were also reportedly considered. Will Smith was undoubtedly the biggest name attached, but turned it down for a few reasons. He said, quote, Django wasn't the lead, so it was like, I need to be the lead. And in case you didn't know, Will Smith has something of an ego problem. The only Oscar winner in history who made himself the lead of the best documentary feature presentation. He also said, quote, I've always avoided making films about slavery, and now is the perfect time to know that he plays a slave in Emancipation. So what he probably meant was, I've always avoided making films about slavery in which I wouldn't be the only marquee name. He also wanted the film to be a full-blown romance, you know, like all those slave rom-coms out there. Boy, Nora Ephron really missed out on that gold mine. Enter Jamie Foxx. As Tarantino put it, quote, when I met him, I was imagining that if they cast black guys in the 60s to be the stars of Western TV shows, I could imagine Jamie having his own TV show. Jamie Foxx even brought along his own horse to play Cheetah. For plantation owner Calvin Candy, Franco Nero himself was rumored to have been considered. As far as Leonardo DiCaprio's involvement, one story goes that Tarantino apparently had someone else in mind but has been hesitant to reveal who. Of all the Hollywood stars he could have attracted, DiCaprio showed the most interest. Actually, he was the first choice to play Hans Landa in Inglourious Basterds. Speaking of Christoph Waltz, Waltz had just won an Oscar for Inglourious Basterds, which could have saved DiCaprio from sleeping in a bear for The Revenant, but still initially turned down Django, fearing that it being written for him would make him feel too catered to. Waltz even read the script as it progressed, with Tarantino supervising, of course, and eventually agreed. Playing Broomhilda von Schaff, the wife of Django who he tries to find after being separated, would be Kerry Washington, reuniting her with Ray co-star Fox. At one point, there was a character called Ace Woody, to be played by Kevin Costner, a known Western lover, and Kurt Russell, who was in Tarantino's Death Proof and later The Hateful Eight, before it was merged with Walter Goggins' character. Goggins himself recruited Tarantino's good friend Robert Rodriguez to help him land the role. Big names circled small roles, like Sacha Baron Cohen, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Jonah Hill. Hill initially had a larger part, but would end up as an unnamed proto-KKK member, which shows just how badly some people want to work with Tarantino. Other small roles will be filled out by the likes of Michael Bowen, Zoe Bell, Tom Savini, and Don Johnson, who nailed his southern accent by studying Foghorn Leghorn. Of note on the costume side of things, Django's primary outfit is inspired by Michael Landon's on Bonanza, which, if we had to guess, was a show that Tarantino definitely had the lunchbox and board game for. His glasses were also lifted from Charles Bronson's in The White Buffalo, lending even more cool to the character. With a budget pegged anywhere between 80 and 100 million, production on Django Unchained commenced in November 2011. With a reported 130 shooting days. The film was shot partly at a ranch once owned by singing cowboy Gene Autry, with snow scenes shot in Jackson, Wyoming, moved from Northern California. Other locations included those in California and Louisiana, including the Evergreen Plantation, which is on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. It would be lensed by cinematographer Robert Richardson, and also give work to a number of other frequent collaborators. Notably missing was producer Lawrence Bender, who Tarantino had a falling out with. Production was relatively smooth, but had some intense moments. The most famous was when DiCaprio cut his hand wide open during a particularly volatile scene, glass embedded in his skin. You can even see him try to pick it out in the film. DiCaprio finished the scene without a cut, as in the director calling cut, because he's Leonardo DiCaprio and still hadn't yet gotten an Oscar. DiCaprio wouldn't even be nominated, but he did get a standing ovation from the cast and crew during that. But it was Kerry Washington who went through the ringer the worst, taking the role as a, quote, creative exploration of this violent, awful, evil, sinful time period, and not some glamorization as usually depicted in Hollywood. Washington went all in. She even refused a stunt double during one particularly nasty whipping scene. At one point, she expressed concern for her own sanity and admitted to facing a form of survival skill, as opposed to actual people who endured slavery. Quote, I got to go home and take a shower every night, eat a nice dinner, and call my therapist. Fox called her courageous, and we wouldn't disagree. It is hands down the most courageous in the film. Production on Django Unchained wrapped in July 2012. The film would be edited by Fred Raskin, replacing the great Sally Menke, Tarantino's then only editor, who tragically died while hiking in 2010. As with most other Quentin Tarantino films, music played a pivotal role. The soundtrack would be a mixture of original tracks and pre-existing ones, like those from American Western Two Mules for Sister Sarah, Spaghetti Western They Call Me Trinity, and racing flick The Last American Hero. And somehow, someway, Jim Croce's I Got a Name completely kills it here. Providing additional music would be the legendary Ennio Morricone. Morricone later judged the director because he, quote, places music in his films without coherence. What, Jim Croce and the Antebellum South doesn't make sense to you? He also claimed he would never work with Tarantino again, but later said his comments were taken out of context, which seems to be true since Morricone later scored The Hateful Eight and won his only competitive Oscar. Morricone's words wouldn't be the only controversy surrounding Django Unchained. The primary one, perhaps expectedly, was the use of the N-word, uttered 110 times. Its employment was met with mixed reactions, and none other than Spike Lee, who else, was the most vocal opponent. Boycotts were led by Lee, who also blasted Tarantino for Jackie Brown many years earlier, which used the word around 3 times less than Django Unchained. Samuel L. Jackson, a collaborator of both Tarantino and Lee, defended his Django Unchained director, comparing the film to a blaxploitation movie. Leonardo DiCaprio himself was unnerved using the word so frequently, but was snapped out of it when Jackson told him, quote, hey mother, this is just another Tuesday for us. Let's go. Jamie Foxx chimed in with, you should be upset if you hear it. Our intention is never to hurt the feelings of any African American, but there was no other word used in the period. There were also complaints over its violence, but Jesus Christ, how many times can this debate happen? Tarantino actually toned down the violence in the film, chiefly in the Mandingo fight sequence and one involving a brutal dog attack. There were also some issues by some about the historical inaccuracies, but since Django Unchained is a revisionist film, it wouldn't be historically spot on, and could take its own liberties whenever it wanted. You know, like killing Adolf Hitler inside a movie theater. Tarantino boiled it down to, quote, every once in a while, films don't play by the rules. It's liberating when you don't know what's happening next. There was also a copyright infringement case lobbed at Tarantino, with 2 writers alleging Django was too similar to their own film titled Freedom. That was dismissed as quickly as Kanye's claim. And let's not forget the series of 6 action figures, including Broomhilda and Samuel L. Jackson's Stephen, which were swiftly removed from shelves because, you know, it's not a good thing to own slaves. With the film all ready for release, with stunning promotional materials and concept art by Federico Mancosu, so impressive that the Weinstein Company purchased the rights, Django Unchained could hit theaters. Well, almost. Its premiere was actually postponed by the Sandy Hook school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. Django Unchained became the highest grossing Quentin Tarantino Tarantino film both domestically and internationally, pulling in $449.8 million worldwide after its 2012 Christmas Day opening. It also earned 5 Academy Award nominations and 2 wins: Best Original Screenplay, Tarantino's second and first since '94's Pulp Fiction, and Best Supporting Actor for Waltz. Waltz reportedly has the record for most screen time of any supporting actor with 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 17 seconds. Tarantino and Waltz ended up doing remarkably well on the awards circuit, also nabbing BAFTAs and Golden Globes. The year after it was released came a comic book. There was also a 2015 Django Zorro crossover, co-written by Tarantino and set around a decade after the events of Django Unchained. Quentin Tarantino also talked of turning the film into a miniseries, with the idea of taking a 165-minute film and expanding it into a 4-part TV miniseries, something he would later try out with The Hateful Eight. Speaking of which, The Hateful Eight has its origins in Django Unchained. At one point, Tarantino wanted to novelize Django as Django in White Hell, but discarded that and ended up using some parts for his Hateful Eight screenplay. But Tarantino would eventually get his shot at novelizing one of his films nearly a decade later, turning Once Upon a Time in Hollywood into a paperback. Book or not, Django Unchained was a massive success for Quentin Tarantino. Plenty controversial, of course, but stands as an innovative piece of revisionist history and one of the limited time only director's most entertaining works. Now, as Django himself said, let's get at it.